Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you today. I'm Lily, your host for Background Interview, the show where we invite remarkable individuals from all walks of life and all periods of history to share their insights and experiences. This podcast is designed to accompany you during your commute, while doing household chores, or during any activity where you might want some intellectual stimulation along with entertainment. It's the perfect background companion to enrich your mind while you go about your day. I'm happy to tell you that our show is broadcasted in 12 languages worldwide, reaching audiences across the globe. And that includes you too. How are you all feeling today? I hope your day is going splendidly. You know, I had quite the morning before coming here. I was running late, as usual, spilled coffee on my favorite blouse, and then couldn't find my car keys. After turning my apartment upside down, I finally found them. In the refrigerator. I must have put them there while I was getting milk for my coffee. I guess that's what happens when you're preparing for an interview with the world's greatest detective. My neighbors probably think I'm losing my mind, but I like to call it creative absent-mindedness. But enough about my morning mishaps. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm absolutely ecstatic to introduce our guest today. This person has solved some of the most perplexing mysteries of the Victorian era, has an unparalleled observation and deduction skills, and has become a legend in detective work. The man who can solve crimes without even leaving his apartment, simply by connecting the dots that others miss. Please join me in welcoming the world's first and only consulting detective.
Thank you for this most generous introduction.
Please, have a seat.
Thank you, Lily. For those who may not be familiar with me, my name is Sherlock Holmes, consulting detective, resident of 221B Baker Street, London. I solve the puzzles that confound the official police force and private individuals alike.
Mr. Holmes, I must confess, I'm a bit nervous having you here. I feel like you've already deduced what I had for breakfast, my entire life story, and what questions I'm going to ask you, just by looking at me.
I do observe that you're right-handed but used your left hand to adjust your notes earlier, suggesting you injured your wrist recently, likely from typing too much while preparing for this interview. You also have cat hair on your trousers, a ginger cat, I believe, though you attempted to remove it with a lint roller before coming here.
That's absolutely correct. My wrist has been bothering me after staying up late researching for this interview, and my neighbor's cat did visit this morning. Mr. Holmes, it's absolutely fascinating to have you here with us today. Many of our listeners know you from the stories published by Dr. John Watson, but I'd love to hear directly from you about your journey. How did you come to be the world's first consulting detective?
The title was a necessity of circumstance, really. There was no precedent for the work I wished to do. Official police detectives were often constrained by protocol and bureaucracy, while private investigators typically handled mundane matters of domestic surveillance. I found myself frequently consulted on cases that defied conventional methods of investigation.
Was there a particular moment when you realized this was your calling?
I wouldn't describe it in such romantic terms as a calling, Lily. It was more a logical progression of my natural inclinations. Even as a child, I was obsessively observant, categorizing and cataloging details others overlooked. My fellow schoolboys found it rather off-putting when I could tell them what they'd had for breakfast, or where they'd been the previous afternoon, simply by observing the stains on their cuffs or the mud on their shoes.
I can imagine that might have made you somewhat unpopular.
Social popularity has never been my primary concern. But yes, it did lead to a certain isolation, which, in retrospect, provided more time for study and observation. By university, I had begun to develop systematic methods for my observations, and soon found that people, initially fellow students, then professors, eventually strangers, began to seek my assistance in solving various puzzles.
And what drew you specifically to criminal investigation rather than, say, scientific research?
The criminal mind presents the most complex and challenging puzzles. Scientific exploration is constrained by the methodical nature of experimentation. Crime, however, introduces the variable of human irrationality. Passion, desperation, greed. These elements create patterns that are simultaneously predictable and wildly chaotic. It is the perfect intersection of logic and the unpredictable human condition.
That's so profound. You've mentioned your methods several times now. Could you elaborate on your approach to detective work? What sets your methods apart from traditional police work of your era?
The fundamental difference is that I observe rather than simply see. Most people look at a scene, a person, an object, but they fail to truly observe the details that matter. My method begins with observation without preconception. I allow the evidence to suggest theories rather than forming a theory and seeking evidence to support it, a common failing among police detectives.
Can you provide an example of how this approach works in practice?
Consider a simple scenario. A man enters a room with dampness on his coat. The average observer thinks, it must be raining. But where exactly is the dampness? Is it on the shoulders, suggesting rain falling from above, or perhaps only on one side, indicating he walked past wet foliage? Is it accompanied by mud spatter in a particular pattern? The precise location and nature of the dampness tells a story that goes far beyond, it is raining.
So it's about the quality of observation, not just noting that something exists.
Precisely. And then, connecting these observations into a coherent narrative. If the dampness is only on the right shoulder and right trouser leg, and accompanied by soap residue, we might deduce the man was washing windows earlier. Each detail eliminates impossibilities until, as I often say, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Do you believe observation is an innate talent, or something that can be learned?
Both. I was fortunate to be born with certain natural proclivities toward detailed observation, but I have honed these abilities through rigorous practice and study. Anyone can improve their observational skills substantially, with dedicated effort. The human mind is a remarkable instrument, but it requires proper tuning.
And what about your famous partnership with Dr. Watson? How does he complement your methods?
Watson, an invaluable companion. While he lacks my specialized observational skills, he provides several critical functions. First, he serves as a sounding board. Articulating my thought process to him often clarifies my own thinking. Second, as a medical man, he brings expertise in anatomy, physiology, and pharmacology that proves essential in many cases. And third, he possesses a normative understanding of human nature that I sometimes lack.
What do you mean by normative understanding?
Watson understands how ordinary people think and feel. He grasps emotional motivations intuitively, while I must deduce them through observation and logic. In cases where human sentiment is central to the mystery, his insights are invaluable. He translates the language of emotion that sometimes eludes me.
That's fascinating. You two sound like complementary pieces of a puzzle. Speaking of puzzles, I'm curious about cases that have particularly challenged you. What investigation stands out as especially memorable or difficult?
A study in Scarlet was notable as my first case with Watson, but in terms of intellectual challenge, The Adventure of the Dancing Men presented a particularly elegant problem. It involved a substitution cipher, pictographs of little stick figures in various dancing positions. The challenge was not merely in breaking the code, but in understanding the urgent message it contained before a murder occurred.
And were you successful?
I decoded the message, yes. Unfortunately, not in time to prevent the attempted murder, though the victim survived and the perpetrator was apprehended. It highlighted an important lesson. Intellectual puzzles are entertaining, but when lives hang in the balance, time becomes the most critical factor.
That must weigh on you, the responsibility for others' safety.
I approach each case with appropriate gravity, but excessive emotional investment clouds judgment. Clear thinking saves more lives than sentiment. That said, I do acknowledge that each failure, even partial ones, stays with me as a lesson for future cases.
What about the final problem? Your confrontation with Professor Moriarty at Reichenbach Falls is perhaps your most famous case.
Moriarty represented a unique challenge. a criminal intellect that matched my own. For years, I had been aware of a coordinating force behind London's criminal enterprises. Tracing those connections led me to the professor, a mathematician by training, who applied his genius to orchestrating crime with mathematical precision.
You famously appeared to have perished in that confrontation. Was that planned?
I had calculated the possibility that confronting Moriarty might result in my death. What I hadn't fully anticipated was the opportunity his demise would provide, a chance to dismantle his criminal network while they believed me dead. So yes, after surviving our struggle at the Falls, I made a strategic decision to maintain the fiction of my demise.
That must have been incredibly difficult for those who cared about you, particularly Dr. Watson.
I regret the pain caused to Watson. It was an error in judgment on my part. I prioritized the strategic advantage over the emotional impact on my closest friend. It is not a decision I would make again.
That's surprisingly reflective, Mr. Holmes. Many accounts paint you as somewhat detached from emotions.
I maintain emotional distance as a professional necessity. Detachment enables objective analysis. However, I am not incapable of emotion. I simply choose to compartmentalize it. My time away, observing the grief of those who believed me dead, was educational in that regard.
Let's shift gears slightly. You're known for your razor-sharp focus on cases, but what about your life outside of detective work? I understand you're an accomplished violinist.
The violin provides necessary mental respite. Complex problems often resolve themselves when the conscious mind is occupied elsewhere. Bach in particular, with his mathematical precision, helps organize my thoughts. Mendelssohn for more contemplative moods, and improvisation when I need to explore possibilities without structure.
And I've heard you conduct chemical experiments as well.
Indeed, chemistry is both practical for my work, identifying substances, understanding chemical reactions relevant to cases, and intellectually stimulating. I've published several monographs on specialized topics, including one on the distinction of tobacco ashes. There are 140 varieties, each identifiable by color and composition.
140 varieties of tobacco ash? That's remarkably specific.
Specificity matters, Lily. A cigar ash found at a crime scene might narrow suspects to those who smoke that precise brand. Details that seem trivial often prove decisive.
Fair point. Now there's something I've been curious about. Your living arrangements at 221B Baker Street. What made you choose that particular location?
Central location, reasonable rent thanks to Mrs. Hudson's toleration of my eccentricities, and proximity to major thoroughfares making it accessible to clients from all parts of London. It's also within walking distance of several major telegraph offices, essential for rapid communication in urgent cases.
And Mrs. Hudson herself? She seems remarkably patient with your unusual habits.
Mrs. Hudson possesses that rare quality of discretion, combined with practicality. She maintains the premises admirably, while ignoring the more unusual aspects of my profession: unexpected visitors at odd hours, occasional chemical odors, experimental sounds from my violin at 3 in the morning. I've solved several minor problems for her family over the years, which perhaps encourages her forbearance.
I'd be remiss not to ask about some of your personal habits that Dr. Watson mentions in his accounts, specifically your use of cocaine and tobacco.
Ah, yes. Watson disapproves, particularly of the 7% solution of cocaine I occasionally employ. I should note that in my era, cocaine was legal and considered medicinal. I use it only when my mind rebels at stagnation, when cases are scarce and mental stimulation lacking. The tobacco is more constant. It aids concentration. 3 pipes of shag tobacco can transform an impossible problem into a solvable one.
From our modern perspective, we now know the serious health risks and addictive properties of both substances.
Indeed. One advantage of conversing across time is gaining such insights. Watson's medical concerns were ahead of his time. Were I practicing today, I would seek alternative methods of mental stimulation. Perhaps excessive caffeine would be my modern vice.
Speaking of relationships, your connection with Inspector Lestrade and the official police force seems complicated. How would you characterize it?
Professional respect tempered by occasional frustration. Lestrade is the best of the professionals, tenacious, dedicated, and not so proud that he refuses assistance. Others at Scotland Yard vary in competence and willingness to collaborate. I recognize the institutional constraints they operate under, which often prevent the intellectual flexibility required for unusual cases.
And Professor Moriarty, was he truly your intellectual equal, your nemesis, as Watson portrays him?
Moriarty represented a dark reflection of my own capabilities, a brilliant mind devoted to orchestrating rather than solving crimes. Our confrontation was inevitable once I became aware of his network. He understood this as well, telling me, "All that I have to say has already crossed your mind." To which I replied, "Then possibly my answer has crossed yours."
It sounds almost like respect between adversaries.
Intellectual respect, certainly. One can acknowledge the brilliance of a complex criminal scheme while deploring its moral bankruptcy. Moriarty was a mathematician who viewed crime as an equation to be optimized. I found his genius misapplied but undeniable.
What about Irene Adler? Watson describes her as the woman who outwitted you.
Ms. Adler demonstrated intelligence, foresight, and adaptability that indeed bested my own efforts in our encounter. She anticipated my methods and countered them effectively. It was refreshing to encounter such a mind. Her victory was well earned.
Just refreshing? Watson seems to imply a deeper admiration.
Watson has a novelist's tendency toward romantic embellishment. I admired her intellect and resourcefulness. That admiration was professional rather than romantic, despite Watson's implications. Though I will concede that effective counter to my methods is uncommon enough to be memorable.
Let's talk about a rather significant figure in your life story, Arthur Conan Doyle, the man who brought your adventures to the public through Watson's accounts. What are your thoughts on how he portrayed your work?
Doyle captured the essence while sometimes sacrificing precision for narrative effect. The fundamental methods are accurately portrayed, but cases were often simplified or dramatized. I understand the literary necessity. Detailed analysis of tobacco ash varieties makes for dry reading, but occasionally important nuance was lost.
I'm curious about your perspective on modern society. Baker Street has become something of a tourist attraction with a museum dedicated to you. How does that strike you?
It's a curious form of immortality. The principles of observation and deduction I employed transcend my specific era, which perhaps explains the enduring interest. I find it ironic that a man who valued privacy has become such a public figure, but if my methods inspire others toward rational inquiry, I can hardly object.
And what about modern investigative techniques? DNA analysis, digital forensics, surveillance cameras?
Fascinating advances. Each new scientific tool expands the observable evidence at a crime scene. In my day, fingerprint analysis was revolutionary. These modern techniques follow the same principle, making visible what was previously invisible. I would have embraced them enthusiastically, though I maintain that technology supplements but cannot replace trained observation and logical reasoning.
What about artificial intelligence and algorithmic prediction of crime?
Algorithms reflect the data they're fed and the assumptions of their creators. They may identify patterns too subtle for human recognition, but lack contextual understanding and adaptability to the unexpected. The criminal element constantly evolves. A truly effective detective must do the same, employing creative leaps that algorithmic systems cannot match.
There's been significant debate about surveillance in modern society. Security cameras, facial recognition, monitoring of digital communications. What's your view as someone who valued both solving crimes and individual liberty?
A profound tension exists between security and privacy. In my era, I could follow a suspect through London without legal constraint. Today's technology enables surveillance at an unprecedented scale, which would have made certain investigations simpler, but raises troubling questions about power and its potential misuse. The capacity to observe must be balanced with strict ethical constraints on when such observation is justified.
Do you worry that technology might eventually make the human detective obsolete?
Not particularly. Technology expands the detective's toolkit, but cannot replace the integrative thinking that connects disparate evidence into coherent narrative. Crimes involving human motivation, deception, and psychological manipulation will always require human insight. The machine may identify an anomalous pattern, but understanding why it matters requires human judgment.
If you could give advice to aspiring detectives or investigators today, what would it be?
Learn to truly observe. In an age of information abundance, the critical skill is distinguishing relevant facts from noise. Practice observing strangers, not in an intrusive manner, but noting details of occupation, habits, recent activities. Develop systematic knowledge in areas relevant to investigation, chemistry, psychology, pattern recognition, and perhaps most importantly, guard against confirmation bias, the tendency to notice only evidence that supports your existing theory.
And what about the moral dimension of detective work? You've mentioned the strategic elements, the intellectual challenge, but what about justice?
Justice is the purpose that gives meaning to method. Without moral orientation, detective work becomes mere puzzle solving. I have occasionally bent legal technicalities when rigid adherence would produce injustice, but always with careful consideration of consequences. The detective must maintain independence of judgment, while recognizing that individual perceptions of justice are fallible.
Is there a case you didn't solve that still troubles you?
There was a disappearance in Sussex. A young woman vanished while walking home. No body was found, no ransom demanded. The evidence suggested multiple possibilities, but confirmed none conclusively. I identified 3 potential scenarios, each plausible, but lacked the decisive fact to determine which occurred. I still revisit my notes periodically, though the principles involved have likely passed on. It represents an intellectual loose end.
That must be difficult for someone who values resolution and clarity.
It is a reminder of epistemic humility. Even the most rigorous methods have limitations. Some truths remain inaccessible despite our best efforts. Accepting this is part of intellectual maturity.
Was that something that was difficult for you to accept earlier in your career?
Indeed. Youth brings certainty. Experience tempers it with awareness of complexity. Early in my practice, I believed sufficient observation could solve any puzzle. Experience taught me that some evidence decays beyond recovery, some witnesses deceive even themselves, and some motivations resist rational analysis. The mature detective recognizes these limitations while still striving to overcome them.
What has surprised you most about how people view your methods and cases across time?
The perceived dichotomy between reason and emotion. Many readers assume my emphasis on rational analysis means absence of emotion rather than its disciplined application. Watson understood better. I feel deeply but selectively. Controlled emotion serves investigation rather than hindering it. Righteous indignation at injustice, empathy that reveals motive, even aesthetic appreciation of a clever criminal scheme. These emotional responses sharpen rather than dull analytical thinking.
That's such an insightful point. Do you think that's why your partnership with Watson worked so well, this balance of analytical and emotional intelligence?
Precisely. Watson's emotional intelligence complemented my analytical focus. He sensed when a witness needed compassion to reveal information, when a client required reassurance rather than just factual assessment. Our different modes of understanding created a more complete investigative approach than either of us could achieve alone.
Was anyone surprised at what you found interesting? I imagine your fascination with the seemingly mundane details most people overlook must have seemed peculiar to many.
My enthusiasm for seemingly trivial details certainly bewildered many. Few share my excitement over discovering a distinctive clay found only in certain London districts, or the way different occupations create specific callus patterns on hands. Watson often expressed exasperation when I would fixate on a detail that seemed irrelevant to him, only to have it prove pivotal later.
Do you have any regrets about your career or the path you chose?
I occasionally wonder whether greater social integration might have provided additional insights into human nature. My deliberate distance from conventional social participation, while facilitating objective analysis, perhaps limited certain forms of understanding. That said, one cannot excel in all domains simultaneously. My specialized expertise required corresponding specialization of focus and experience.
Let's talk a bit about the concept of truth itself. As a detective, you're fundamentally seeking truth. But we now live in an era where the nature of truth is frequently contested. What are your thoughts on this?
An intriguing philosophical problem. I distinguish between factual truths, observable, verifiable phenomena, and interpretive truths, which involve meaning and value judgments. My methods excel at establishing factual truths. A footprint is of certain dimensions, a document written with particular ink. The meaning of these facts, the narrative they support, involves interpretation where reasonable minds may sometimes differ.
Would you say that's why we need both science and art, both detective work and storytelling?
A perceptive observation. Science and detective work establish what is factually true. Art and storytelling explore what is meaningfully true, the human significance of events. Watson's accounts of our cases provide both the factual sequence of investigation and the human drama that gives it significance. One without the other would be incomplete.
Is there anything from your era that you think modern society has lost, perhaps to its detriment?
Attention span and observational habits. The Victorian era lacked your digital distractions. People observed their surroundings more directly. Modern conveniences bring tremendous advantages, but the constant fragmenting of attention may diminish capacity for sustained observation and deep concentration. These are muscles that atrophy without regular exercise.
That's a profound observation. And what about modern advances that you particularly admire?
Medical science. Unquestionably. Watson would be astonished by modern diagnostic capabilities. Diseases that were death sentences in my era are now routinely curable. Forensic science has similarly transformed. DNA analysis alone would have resolved numerous challenging cases I encountered. And the democratization of information access through digital technology would have been revolutionary for research that once required days in specialized libraries.
I must say, Mr. Holmes, you're remarkably adaptable for someone from the Victorian era. Many people struggle to adjust their thinking to new evidence and changing social norms.
Adaptability is essential to the scientific mind. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data, as I've often said. When new data emerges, theories must adapt accordingly. Rigidity of thought is antithetical to both scientific progress and effective detective work. The facts are paramount. One's preferred theories are secondary and provisional.
Is there any case or experience that fundamentally changed how you view human nature?
The adventure of the yellow face humbled me significantly. I constructed an elaborate theory involving extortion based on circumstantial evidence, only to discover the case involved nothing more than a man's wife sheltering her child from a previous marriage. A child of mixed racial heritage she feared her new husband might reject. My elaborate conspiracy theory collapsed before the simple reality of a mother's love and fear. It reminded me that human emotions sometimes defy rational prediction.
It sounds like that case affected you deeply.
It reinforced that emotional motivations can be as powerful as rational self-interest. Criminal investigation often focuses on cui bono, who benefits materially. But people act against material self-interest for love, loyalty, fear, shame, pride. Understanding these emotional drivers is as essential as following financial motives. It's another area where Watson's insight frequently complemented my analytical approach.
Okay, now it's time for questions from the audience. Music, please. I have a big apology to make. Our email system was somehow down and still isn't working, so we could not receive any questions from listeners by email this time. I'm very, very sad about it. I'm so sorry if you sent us any questions by email. Nothing personal, but just a technical issue. So, we have no questions from listeners this time, and move on directly to questions from the studio. I wonder if any of our audience members have questions about this fascinating discussion we're having with Mr. Holmes. Let's find out. I see a hand in the back. Let me come to you. As I walk through this audience, I can't help but notice at least 3 people discreetly hiding their hands. I wonder what deductions Mr. Holmes would make about that. Hello there, what's your name? Emma, it's lovely to meet you. What question do you have for Mr. Holmes? That's a fascinating question. Emma wants to know whether you've ever been completely wrong in your deductions, Mr. Holmes, and if so, how you handled it.
An excellent question, Emma. Yes, I have been wrong on several occasions, though I strive to minimize such errors through methodical analysis. The most notable example was in The Adventure of the Yellow Face, which I just mentioned, where I constructed an elaborate theory that proved entirely incorrect. The handling of such errors is critical. I acknowledge them explicitly, analyze where my reasoning failed, and incorporate that lesson into future investigations. Intellectual pride that prevents admission of error is the enemy of true detection.
I find that refreshing, Mr. Holmes. Many experts struggle to admit when they've been wrong. Do we have another question from the audience? Yes. The gentleman in the tweed jacket. Coming over to this side now. I'm noticing so many people taking notes. Mr. Holmes, you've created quite the studious atmosphere here. Hello, sir. What's your name? James. Welcome. What would you like to ask Mr. Holmes? Wow, I see. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, James. That's something many of our listeners might be interested in as well. James is curious about your thought process during investigations. He asks if you ever use what we might today call visualization techniques, or memory palaces, to organize information about cases.
Indeed, James. I employ what you might call a mind attic, a mental architecture for organizing information. Unlike a modern computer that stores everything indiscriminately, the human mind must be selective. I visualize my memory as an attic, where I carefully arrange tools and references. Trivial matters receive minimal space, while useful knowledge, soil types of southern England, fingerprint patterns, distinctive tobacco ashes, are meticulously catalogued and cross-referenced. During active cases, I mentally arrange evidence in spatial patterns, allowing me to visualize connections that might not be apparent in linear thinking.
That sounds similar to the memory palace technique used by ancient orators. Let's take one final question. Anyone else? Yes, the young woman near the front. I'm making my way over now. I've always wondered how stage performers handle these audience interactions so smoothly. Now I know it's quite the workout. Hello there, what's your name? Sophia, lovely to meet you. What's your question for Mr. Holmes? Nice question about Mycroft. Okay, noted well. Sophia asks about your relationship with your brother Mycroft. She's curious about how family dynamics influenced your detective work, and whether sibling rivalry played any role in your career choice. Mr. Holmes, would you care to address this more personal question?
Mycroft possesses even greater observational and deductive capabilities than my own, though he lacks the energy and inclination for fieldwork. Our relationship has always been one of mutual respect rather than rivalry. Where we differ is in application. He applies his intellect to governmental affairs, primarily from the comfort of the Diogenes Club, while I prefer active investigation. Our parents encouraged analytical thinking in both of us, though they likely never anticipated the particular directions our talents would take. Mycroft occasionally consults on matters of national importance, and I periodically seek his insight on particularly complex cases. I wouldn't say family dynamics drove my career choice so much as our shared intellectual proclivities expressed themselves in complementary ways.
Thank you, Sophia, for that question, and thank you everyone for your participation. You've been a wonderful audience. And now, I'm returning to the stage.
Your audience asks remarkably insightful questions, Lily. It's refreshing to encounter such thoughtful curiosity.
They're the best. I'm incredibly grateful for them, and for your candid responses, Mr. Holmes. Which of the audience questions resonated most with you? It's always interesting to hear what aspects of a great detective's work capture people's imagination. Mr. Holmes, if I may, I have some personal questions I've been eager to ask you. In your professional career, you've encountered countless individuals from all walks of life. Has any particular encounter changed your perspective on humanity in a way that surprised you?
An unexpected question, but a thoughtful one. I recall a case involving a housemaid accused of stealing a valuable jewel. All evidence pointed to her guilt. Opportunity, lack of alibi, a history of financial difficulty. The case seemed transparently obvious. However, upon closer observation of subtle details, the positioning of furniture, wear patterns on the floor, I realized the actual thief was the victim's son, who had framed this young woman to cover his gambling debts.
That must have been satisfying to solve.
The revelation itself was merely intellectual satisfaction. What affected me more profoundly was the maid's reaction. When I cleared her name, she expressed no bitterness toward her accuser, only relief and gratitude. She had accepted her fate with dignity despite its injustice. It reminded me that quiet nobility exists in unexpected places, often among those society overlooks. The capacity for grace under undeserved suspicion is perhaps more remarkable than the cleverness of the criminal.
That's beautifully expressed, Mr. Holmes. Let me ask you something very different. If you hadn't become a detective, what alternative path might you have taken?
Had circumstances been different, I would likely have devoted myself to chemical research. The scientific method, the formulation and testing of hypotheses, the relentless pursuit of empirical truth, forms the backbone of both detective work and scientific inquiry. I might have contributed to the understanding of alkaloid compounds, or developed new analytical methods for identifying substances. The criminal element provides unpredictable variables that make detective work particularly engaging, but pure research would have satisfied my intellectual curiosity, if perhaps not my appetite for practical application.
Do you ever envy Dr. Watson's relative normalcy, his medical practice, his marriage, his more conventional social life?
Envy suggests dissatisfaction with one's circumstances, and desire for another's. I experience neither. Watson's life suits his temperament as mine suits my own. His capacity for sustained contentment in domestic life is as foreign to my nature as my ability to focus intensely on a single problem for days without food or sleep would be to his.
It seems you've found a path perfectly suited to your unique abilities and temperament. Let's shift gears a bit and play a fun game with our audience. I'd like to propose a quiz about Mr. Holmes.
By all means, I'm curious to see what questions you've prepared.
Let's have some music for this segment, please. Here's my first question for our audience. Mr. Holmes is known for playing a musical instrument, but which does he prefer? The violin or the cello? If you think it's the violin, make a fist and raise it. If you think it's the cello, raise an open palm. I'm seeing a lot of fists in the air, though there are definitely some open palms as well. The majority seems to believe it's the violin. Mr. Holmes, would you care to enlighten us?
The majority is correct. The violin has been my faithful companion through many cases. Its versatility allows for both technical precision and emotional expression. The cello, while a noble instrument, lacks the portability and range that suits my temperament. I often play at odd hours when working through complex problems, sometimes to Watson's considerable annoyance.
Excellent. And I notice many of you nodding. You clearly know your Holmes facts well. Let's try another one. Mr. Holmes has a famous address in London. Is it 221A Baker Street or 221B Baker Street? Fist for 221A, open palm for 221B. Almost unanimously, 221B. Our audience is well informed today. Mr. Holmes, confirm for us?
Indeed, 221B Baker Street has been my residence throughout most of my career. Mrs. Hudson is the landlady of the entire house, residing in the ground floor flat. I occupy the first floor apartment, or what Americans would call the second floor, designated as 221B. The rooms have a certain Victorian charm that suits my needs, with windows overlooking Baker Street that allow for discreet observation of visitors approaching.
Thank you for confirming. The audience is doing remarkably well with these questions. I should mention that I got both questions right as well. Of course I did. I wrote the questions myself. Thank you for being such a good sport with our quiz, Mr. Holmes. We appreciate your participation. I notice our time together is drawing to a close, though I could certainly continue this fascinating conversation for hours more.
I appreciate the audience's enthusiasm. It's rare to encounter such genuine interest in the methods of detection, rather than merely the sensational elements of the cases.
Mr. Holmes, as we begin to wrap up our conversation, I'd like to reflect on what we've discussed today. We've explored your journey to becoming a detective, your investigative methods, memorable cases, and personal philosophies. Your insights on observation, deduction, and the careful balance between scientific precision and human understanding have been truly illuminating.
It's been my pleasure, Lily. In an age increasingly dominated by digital distractions, the art of focused observation becomes ever more valuable. If our discussion encourages even a few listeners to look more carefully at the world around them, to observe rather than merely see, then I consider this time well spent.
I believe you've given our audience much to reflect on. Your methods aren't just applicable to solving crimes. They represent a mindful approach to understanding reality that we can all benefit from. Before you go, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with our audience?
I would emphasize that while my methods may appear extraordinary, they are fundamentally based on skills that anyone can develop. Careful observation, logical reasoning, and systematic knowledge acquisition are available to all. The world reveals its secrets to those patient enough to observe the details others overlook. Whether solving mysteries or simply navigating daily life, these principles serve equally well. As I once told Watson, education never ends. It is a series of lessons with the greatest for the last.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experiences with us today, Mr. Holmes. It has been an absolute honor.
The honor has been mine. Good day to you all.
Thank you all for listening, both our live audience here in the studio and those of you going about your day with us in the background. Your continued support makes this show possible, and I'm grateful for every one of you. What did you find most memorable about today's interview with Sherlock Holmes? His methodical approach to observation, his thoughts on modern investigative techniques, or perhaps his surprising reflections on his personal relationships? Take a moment to consider what resonated most with you. And now it's time for our Quote of the Day segment. Music, please! Today's quote is this. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Let me say that once again. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. This famous quote comes from none other than our guest today, Sherlock Holmes, and appears in several of Dr. Watson's accounts of their adventures, including The Sign of the Four. It encapsulates Holmes' deductive method perfectly, the process of systematically ruling out impossibilities until only one explanation remains, no matter how unlikely it may initially seem. You know, I've been thinking about how this applies beyond detective work. In science, researchers eliminate alternative hypotheses through experimentation. In medicine, doctors rule out possible diagnoses through tests. Even in our daily lives, when troubleshooting a problem, we often unconsciously follow this approach. The difference is that Holmes applies this method with extraordinary rigor and precision. Makes me wonder how many mysteries in my own life I could solve if I were just a bit more methodical. You know what? Actually, Maybe many of my mysteries were actually discovered, but Mr. Holmes was perhaps kind enough not to mention on air today. I wonder. Anyway, what do you think about today's quote? Does Holmes's principle of elimination resonate with how you approach problems in your own life? We're truly approaching the end of our time together now. I want to thank you all for joining us for another episode of Background Interview. If you enjoyed today's show, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and leave a comment letting us know what you thought. We'd also love to hear your suggestions for future guests you'd like us to interview. Your engagement helps us create better content for you. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so through the QR code in the bottom right corner of the video, or through the links in the description. Your contributions make this show possible, and they're genuinely appreciated. That's where my salary comes from, after all. While Background Interview is perfect for background listening, as the name suggests, we also have playlists of our past episodes that are great companions while you're doing chores, exercising, or just need a friendly voice when you're feeling lonely. They're like an intellectual lullaby if you're having trouble falling asleep. And as mentioned in our channel description, we offer episodes in 12 different languages, which is fantastic for language learning. I actually listen to our French episodes myself to brush up on my language skills. You know, it actually really helps me because I can easily guess what's being talked about. My colleague in France often copies my jokes and questions. But to be fair, I often copy questions from my Japanese colleague too. Our next guest is someone truly special, a legendary figure whose insights have shaped human thinking for generations. I can't reveal who it is just yet, but I promise it's an episode you won't want to miss. Until next time, this has been Background Interview. I'm your host, Lily, and I look forward to our next conversation. Goodbye for now. Phew, that was intense. I was so nervous the entire time. Interviewing the Sherlock Holmes? Talk about pressure. You know what I really wanted to ask him but was too intimidated to bring up? I wanted to know if he ever feels lonely. Behind all that brilliant deduction and logical reasoning, there seems to be such isolation. Watson clearly adores him, but does Holmes ever long for deeper connections? Does he ever just want someone to understand him completely, not just admire his methods? I wonder if that remarkable mind of his sometimes feels like a barrier between him and the rest of humanity. It's the question I most wanted answered, but somehow, facing those penetrating eyes, I just couldn't bring myself to ask something so personal. But perhaps someday I'll get the chance to ask him. Until next time, dear listener.